introduce our distinguished lecturer, Yale Patt, the Ernest Cockrell Centennial Chair Professor at University of Texas, Austin. We don't very often have distinguished lecturers, so I think I should take a few moments and clarify what it means to be a distinguished lecturer. And we may say a distinguished lecturer is someone who has the appropriate degrees from reputable universities and more than enough awards for his research and teaching. So I think this is a very appropriate description for Yale, and because I'm reading it directly from his bios. But more seriously, so Yale is widely recognized for his teaching and research accomplishments. He has received the 1995 IEEE Fiore Medal for contribution to computer architecture, leading to commercially viable high-performance microprocessors, and in 1996, the Edgar Mockley Award for important contribution to instruction-level parallelism and superstandard processor design. And in 1999, the IEEE Wallace W. McDowell Award for his impact on the high-performance microprocessor industry via a combination of important contribution to both engineering and education. So I'd just like to point out, Yale is quite unique in that his dedication to education. He takes great pride in teaching undergraduates, particularly freshman courses. He has written a one-of-a-kind freshman introductory computer engineering text that provides what we call a vertically integrated introduction to computer engineering and computer science. So today, Yale is here to give his prediction for what microprocessor will look like in 10 years from now. So let's welcome Yale.
Thank you. And there's even 2 minutes left for the talk. The talk is always the same. It's a title that changes because when I go back to the school and I tell the dean, look at all these talks I gave, and he counts all these different talks. And so we keep changing the title. And it's, what's the microprocessor going to look like? What are the problems? What are some of the things we're going to find on it? There's one of the transparencies in there which I was here a couple years ago, I guess. Turns out this fellow I used to have in class invited me to come and give a talk here a couple years ago. And he ended up even providing pizza. The trouble was that by the time I got through my talk, there was none left. So I had to go hungry. How many of you were at that talk I gave a couple years ago? I'm just curious. Yeah, so I know I know that Babak doesn't want me to show that slide again. If he has to see that, Babak, where are you, Babak? How many times have you seen that slide? 10, 12? At least three. So you don't want me to show that slide again, right? All right. So I won't. And my awards, actually the McDowell Award, I wasn't impressed with it until then Pradeep Khosla got it. And I said, wow, this must really be... I said, this is really it. Now I am a big deal, you know. So anyway. And questions, whenever you have questions, just, if I'm looking your way, then it's polite to raise your hand. If I'm looking the other way, you can just sound out. What do we got? 2 hours, 3 hours? So where'd James go? Where are you, James? Oh, as much time as I want. Good. So what I thought I would do today is once I get started, which who knows how long it's going to be until then. So distinguished lecturer is like the keynote speaker. Is that it? Yeah. Professor Mura reminded me of how you can tell that a conference is really a fourth-rate conference. First of all, they won't publish a paper in the proceedings unless you attend in person. Secondly, the conference is held at a very fancy resort that the only reason you'd go there would be for the resort. You wouldn't go there for the conference. Third, the registration fee is just enormous. And fourth, they invite you to give the keynote. I love that one, you know. Who came up? Bruce came up with that, huh? Is Bruce here, by the way? Bruce is not here. He's got work to do. Huh? I'm sorry?
That's the fourth reason. You are giving the dog.
I'll give you the dog. So Bruce stayed back in his office. Now, anyway, so the talk is the challenges, Moore's Law Revisited. This is new since I was here last. And it's not original. It comes from a videotape. Have you guys seen the videotape from Intel on Moore's Law? How many of you have seen that? One person. Good. Great. Two people. Yeah. Tremendous insight from Carver Mead, who's a very bright guy. So I want to talk about that a bit. And then the thrust of the talk is where the answers to these challenges will come from. Before I get started, I do have a couple of slides that have nothing to do with the talk, but I'm at a university and I just got to do it because I got to do it. Great coffee, by the way. One of the one of the groups here knows good coffee, and so made me a special pot of specially brewed Kenya AA. So you all know about pipelining. That's nothing new to you. And X is in, and you go through the pipeline, and you get the result out the other end. And we pipeline instructions, and we also pipeline students. And if you pipeline students, you end up with graduates. Okay? And stage E of the pipeline is what? Is the thesis, right? But before they're ready to write a thesis, you've got to have all this, that most serious of all courses, the senior level solid foundation course in the field, which then allows one to go as high as his or her talents and energy will take the student. And that's usually the senior level, senior first year graduate course, as opposed to the advanced graduate course, which is much more narrowly focused. And that's probably the first place that the professor sees this future star. And I would argue that where the professor ought to see that future star is in the freshman year. Because that's when you develop the real basic foundation. And so this is really for the faculty, and I want the graduate students to beat up the faculty afterwards to tell them, yeah, he's right. That when the professor sees a student for the first time, when the student is a senior and says, oh, God, this kid does not know anything, whose fault is it? It's the professor's fault. Because if the professor would teach him in the freshman course, then when the student got to be a senior, you'd have something you could work with. So the motto of the story is, senior faculty, teach freshman courses. You'll be glad you did. The second slide, before I get started, is this one. There's a lot of talk, that computer architecture is dead. There's only one ISA out there. You all know what ISA is, Instruction Set Architecture. It's the interface between the software and the hardware. It's this interface that the software and hardware people agree will be the representation. The software produces what the zeros and ones mean to get the useful work done, and then the hardware takes these zeros and ones and actually produces the useful work. And it's getting to the point where there's one ISA, the x86, and so people are saying, computer architecture is dead. Go on, you really want a career in computing? Do web design. Or, learn about computer networks, but don't worry about being the bowels of, the operating system or the architecture, the compiler. Those are just bricks. You want higher levels without. So I would argue that computer architecture will always be alive and healthy as long as people can dream. And the dreamers are not the computer architects. The dreamers are the people coming up with new and interesting problems that computers can solve. So what what's going on is that the process technology people, so here I said it, the interface. Computer architecture is about the interface between what technology can provide and what the market demands. And so as time goes by, the microprocessor a couple of years from now is going to have 1 billion transistors on it. It's going to run at frequencies in excess of 10 gigahertz. And so what do you do with all that stuff? Now there are problems, and we'll talk about that once I get started. But there is all this more and more stuff, and that more and more stuff, when handled properly, can produce higher and higher performance machines, which then serve as an enabling factor for more and more interesting problems. And so the thing keeps feeding on itself. And as long as people can dream up more interesting problems that maybe now computers will be ready for, it's not going to be that long from now, probably within the next 20 years from now, you get out of work, you go into your car, you open the door, you sit in the back seat. The sitting on the seat will, a sensor will pick up your weight on the seat, and then there'll be a voice-synthesized speech saying, "Where to, master?" And you'll say, "Home." And there'll be the voice recognizer, which will take the home, and then look it up on a table, and then go through all the GPS stuff and take you home. And you'll be as if you had a taxi. And the technology is actually pretty much there now. The safety thing isn't there, and the cost certainly isn't there. But there's a problem that's kind of interesting, and all the computers interacting to make sure that the safety thing does get solved, and we do it economically. So as time goes by, the dreamers keep coming up with more and more interesting stuff, which means that those of us who are in computer architecture always have work. At this interface of computer architecture, now the thing that I've always been doing is performance. I'm interested in this higher and higher performance structure. But there are other design points also, which are equally important and useful for serious work in computer architecture. So computer architecture is not at all dead. It is alive and well, even if there's only one ISA out there. And actually, it's getting to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if there is only one ISA out there. IBM is one of the innovators or the derivers, I guess, of PowerPC, but there's a lot of IBM machines that have x86s in them. Sun Microsystems has now signed a contract with AMD. They're going to buy their, replace no more Spark chips. So I guess you got to recompile Sun OS for, they're going to buy their chips from AMD, x86s. So it may be there's only one ISA, but there's certainly plenty of work to do for all these design points. I don't want to belabor the design points too much. Power, very important, power consumption. So that if you get on a flight from here to Sydney, Australia, you can play solitaire the whole way without battery. Availability, computer never goes down. So that if you get, you get in a fight and blood is gushing out and they rush you to the hospital, and you got to have those computers that are up and running. Otherwise, if they can't check your Blue Cross card, you could bleed to death while you're waiting for the, to be serviced. Anyway, so enough. And the final slide before I get started is this one, which is always my introductory way of getting into this business of computer architecture. Here is ISA, the instruction set architecture. Here it is at the interface between the software-related stuff and the hardware-related stuff. And not all of you are interested in computer architecture. Maybe not all of you are interested in computers. I don't know. Although it's kind of hard to work in the year 2004 without being somewhat involved in computers. But being involved in computers could be at the problem level, problem definition level, in some high level, in some natural language, English, French, Japanese, whatever. And it's really the electrons that do the work. If I could only speak electron. Wouldn't it be, or better yet, I don't speak electron. In fact, You know what they call people who speak 2 languages? Bilingual. Good, good. Got some people that, good, good. 3 languages? Trilingual. Good. 1 language? American, right. So I'm an American. I don't even speak electron. Now, if I could get the electrons to speak English, then I could go, electrons! And they would do the job, and I'd have a global optimum from here to there, right? And it's never better than a global optimum. But I don't speak electrons. Electrons don't speak English. So the best I can do is to go through this sequence of transformations from the natural language down to the electrons. And many of you in this room that don't have a clue about computer architecture are working very productively at the circuit level, at the microarchitecture level, at the algorithm level. In fact, the algorithm level is kind of interesting. So sorting, which you all know that sorting is what? What's the best you can do sorting? With big O what? N log n. So the fastest you can ever sort is n log n? No. Why not? Because the n log n, what is n? Number of comparisons, and it assumes you're doing them one at a time. Right? So, for example, in fact, I just found out that there's quicksort has historically been known as an n-squared algorithm. I use quicksort as my example because, except in very, very pathological cases, quicksort, if you had enough comparators that you could do things in parallel, you could do quicksort in time approximating linear time. See, because how does quicksort work? You take one of the elements, the seed, you compare it against the n things you're trying to sort, and for each comparison, it's either bigger or smaller. It either goes in that bucket or that bucket. After that first pass, you have these 2 buckets. How many comparisons do you have to do between an element taken from that bucket and an element taken from that bucket? None. Yeah, the 3rd grade, you learned the law of transitivity, right? A is less than B, B is less than C, therefore you know A is less than C. So now you can work on the 2 buckets totally independently, and then 4 buckets. Now, if it's pathological, that is, for example, supposing the list is originally in the reverse of sorted order, well, apparently there are some tweaks which can identify that early on and take that pathological case and break it up into smaller cases so you're much better than n squared. The major point I want to make is that your ability to do a sorting algorithm is enhanced if you understand what the microarchitecture looks like. And the n log n thing assumes 1 comparison at a time. And there are sorting algorithms like quicksort that admit lots of comparisons at the same time. So understanding what's at other levels can enhance your ability to get the job done at the higher level. So even though historically we make the sequence of transformations, we can't speak electrons, so I can't just say electrons do the job. But I can do better than treat these layers as separate layers with these walls between them. In fact, should I embarrass the guy when he's not even here to defend himself? This big deal Turing Award winner from the United Kingdom who gave a talk at UT Austin the other day was talking about coming up with a grand challenge, solution to a grand challenge problem of verifying compiler. And as part of his given, he insisted that the language that he was going to come up with for this verifying compiler was not allowed to have pragmas in it. It's unfair. You know, unfair. Who's keeping score? That is, if you really want a verifying compiler, don't you want to help the problem as much as you can? Or is it only a grand challenge problem if you play according to some artificial set of rules? So I would argue that if you really want to do a verifying compiler and it helps if you do something about the language you're trying to compile, like stick pragmas in that's going to help the compiler to generate the code, then you just do it. Because the more you can do across these layers, the better you are. And we will see this slide in another incarnation momentarily. The challenges. So the two big challenges are how to use what the device people are going to give us. 1 billion transistors on a chip and frequencies in excess of 10 gigahertz. Some of you have been to my lecture before, so you're not allowed to participate in this one. You know what this is? Nobody? Somebody got it? Keychain. Yeah, keychain, right. See that? Carnegie-Mellon, you know? I'll bet that if I was giving this talk at Pittsburgh Community College, that more people would get that one right, you know? It's the Pentium chip, 1992, so it's old. Doesn't work, because if it worked, they would have sold it instead of turning it into a keychain for me to talk to people about. But the ones that do work, 3.1 million transistors, 50 megahertz, 1992. The first microprocessor was when? 1971. So 20 years before this came out was the first microprocessor. It wasn't 3.1 million transistors. How many? 2,300. So 2,300 to 3.1 million. The frequency is 100 kilohertz, not 50 megahertz. So I use this point in time because it's in my pocket. 20 years before, 2,300 transistors, 100 kilohertz. This point in time, 3.1 million transistors, 50 megahertz. Today, the Power 5 chip coming out of IBM, 267 million transistors. Power 4, which is already out a couple of years, is 180 million transistors. The Pentium 4, the latest Pentium 4 is 55 million transistors and runs at 3.8 gigahertz. That's the whole, the chip. The internal core is running at twice that frequency, 7.6 gigahertz. A couple of years from now, we'll have this. Wow. Remember? People are dreaming up new, this is enabling technology to let people dream, and our job to harness that technology. But there are problems, or opportunities, prefer to think of it as. Power, that's a problem. It's getting to the point that leakage current is overwhelming the switching current. So I got these transistors sitting on that chip, minding their own business. You know, let's make a huge cache. You know, I got a billion transistors. Wow, what a huge cache you could build with a billion transistors. Not a terrible useful way to go, because the billion transistors doesn't give you a big enough cache to be able to do, we're not talking about embedded processor space where all the memory sits right on the chip. We're talking about computing where you do have to go out to the disk. Billion transistors is still not big enough to have the whole problem on the chip. So you can't make a big enough cache with all those transistors. So you still have to do cache refills. Throw something away, bring something in. So using the billion transistors for that, to just make a huge cache, doesn't seem to make sense. Even if it did make sense, all those transistors are storing information that are not switching. In fact, Danny Hillis's thesis, one of the good things that I liked in that thesis, was this notion of why is it that if you do the multiplication, you say, here's a processor, and it's got 10 to the 9th transistors, and it's got switching time measured in 10 to the 9th events per second. That's 10 to the 9th times 10 to the 9th, 10 to the 18th. And you got this other thing called the human, and it's got 10 to the 10th transistors. We call them neurons. They also switch. But they switch in the millisecond range. So that's 10 to the 3. So 10 to the 10 times 10 to the 3 is 10 to the 13. And so why is it that the human can switch at 10 to the 13? The processor can switch at 10 to the 18. And so you think the processor could do more than the human, and yet when you drive down the road, the human can pick the red light out. You're driving in Times Square, say, in New York, and the human can pick out the red light and the computer can't, and yet it can do 5 orders of magnitude more than the human can. And Hillis's answer, which I think is right on target, is that you've got all this 10 to the 18 switchings per second possible. Most of the switching is not happening. Most of these transistors are just sitting there minding their own business, consuming leakage power and getting worse all the time. So having a cache sitting there that's huge is probably not the right answer. So what is the right answer? Well, that's in, I don't know. Greg, you here someplace? So how many hours you think I got here? He asked me when I walked in, did I bring both my slides? But James told me I got as much time as I want, so we'll see. Also, with all these transistors, the design complexity. So is there anything I can do about that? The answer to all those things is, of course, and that's what this is all about. Frequency in excess of 10 gigahertz. I have on-chip, off-chip disparity. Some people refer to it as a memory wall. So you take a cache miss and you go off-chip and it takes forever. Mark Hill, a professor at the University of Wisconsin, pointed out to me a couple of years ago, which I thought was brilliant, that we worry about out-of-order execution and saving, being able to have these 2 floating point multipliers go at the same time, and so I can save the floating point multiply time. And this was a couple of years ago when I think in the last couple of years we actually have improved. We used to model very carefully L1 cache misses, but then the L2 cache, well, the perfect L2 cache, And Mark Hill pointed out to me that if you miss in the L2 cache, the time you waste in performance will be the same as if you actually unnecessarily did 400 floating point operations. So L2 cache miss, going off chip, serious problem, especially at these frequencies. And then on-chip propagation time. So if you're up to 10 gigahertz, if you produce a result at this corner of the chip and you want to send it here, you probably ought to pack it a good lunch because it's going to take forever to get all the way over there. And it's already the case that if a signal is going to go from here to here, the Pentium 4, if you look at the pipeline in Pentium 4 is now what, at least 35 stages. And some of those stages do nothing more than take this result. And if you look at it says fetch, or it says decode, or it says rename, or something else, it says drive. And what drive means, do nothing but get that value over to where it's useful. And there's an extra stage. The Power 5 chip, which will be announced from IBM, I don't know, next week, the week after, whenever. It's imminent, like they're in the final stages of it, and you look at the pipeline, it doesn't say drive, it says drive, drive. There's 2 cycles now to get from here to here on the chip. So this propagation time gets worse. So I have to do something about that. So the fact that I've got so many transistors on the chip, the fact that I've got such a high frequency presents problems. And now the slide that Professor Falsafi does not want me to show is this one. And so what I'll do is I'll show it, but I won't cover it. How's that? The first time, when are you going to learn PowerPoint so you don't have to play these silly games? Probably never, By the way, those of you that teach, students would prefer that you left your laptop at home. Use the blackboard or whiteboard. PowerPoint, it puts them to sleep. They don't have to worry with me. The first time I did this slide, I hadn't discovered Post-its yet. So what I did is I had 6 pens that I put, and then one by one I would pull them away. The point of the slide is that these challenges, according to the gurus in the field, You just can't deal with it. You know, the naysayers, they say, go for the low-hanging fruit. Stop wasting your time with, you know, my branch predictor, for example. You know, we have the best branch predictor out there, and we're at 98% accurate, and we're working on making it 99% accurate. 99% accurate is a lot better than 98% accurate. You say, give me a break. No, I'm serious. If you've got a 35-stage pipeline and you're fetching multiple instructions each cycle, the amount of work you have to throw away 2% of the time versus 1% of the time is 2 to 1. It's enormous. Double the performance if we could go from 98% accurate to 99% accurate. So there's that one. CAD can't verify. Law of diminishing returns. So there's all these things they tell you, stop working on this. These problems are just too hard. Work on easier problems. And if I had, so I'll just leave this at this, and if somebody later on wants me to peel off these, I'll peel them. But otherwise, if I go through this slide carefully, this slide by itself is one of my half-hour slides, so I won't. What I will do is say that rather than listen to the naysayers, and every one of those post-its is a response which says that the naysayers that are telling us no are wrong, that there really is a counter-argument that prevails over the first argument. Rather than listen to naysayers, I'd like to look at Moore's Law, and I take this from Carver Mead, from that videotape that I saw. I mean, it's 10 minutes, and I don't know whether you should be able to get it, I would think, from Intel. Intel's probably very happy to show it to you. And I think it's brilliant, if only for this one little thing. Is Moore's Law, so, you know, quiz time, is it a law of physics, process technology, microarchitecture, or psychology? What is it a law of?
Business plan.
Huh?
Business plan.
It's a business plan. If the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Business plan. The correct answer is D, psychology. 1965, Gordon Moore plotted on semi-log paper. You know semi-log paper? Log scale on the y-axis. You all know about y-axes? Yeah, right. I'm going to see it here. So semi-log paper, he plotted number of transistors on a chip. Number is the y-axis. Time is the x-axis. And it was a straight line. And so, you know, straight line on semi-log paper is an exponential. And he inferred for the number of transistors on a chip, and it's like 65 is when he did this, that the number of transistors on a chip will double every 18 months. And now we fast forward 40 years, and it's still happening. And every 5 years, you know, Moore's Law, that was fine for before, but, you know, we've reached the end, and, you know, no more. And then 5 years go by, and we're still tracking Moore's Law. Now, why is that? It's very simple. You go out to the Bay Area, for example, where these companies are, and here you are in Company A, and you're a process technology person, and the boss is saying, we have 18 months, we better double the number of transistors. Which means, you know, get the process better so that you can make bigger chips, you know. You make a wafer. The wafers now are getting like this. It's ridiculous. And then you slice them up into dies, and you have to have at least one good die, otherwise you can't amortize the cost of the wafer. So if you understand the technology better, then you can make the dies bigger. Meanwhile, the lithography is getting better and better, so you can make the transistors smaller. Smaller transistors, bigger die, more transistors in a chip. And you say to the boss, I can't, you know, we've reached the end. Naysayers. The boss says, 18 months, double the number of transistors. I can't. We've run out of room. Well, you know, the average expectancy of a marriage in Silicon Valley is measured in hours or something, you know. Life expectancy of a marriage, divorce, etc. And it's not just men divorcing wives, it's wives divorcing husbands. I mean, it works both ways. There are men and women that are working, got to double the number of transistors on the chip. You got 18 months to do it. Can't do it. We better do it, because if we don't do it, company B down the street, and they do it, then we'll be flipping hamburgers. So they work and work and work, and sure enough, they succeed. Meanwhile, company B, double the number of transistors on the chip. And time goes by, and they continue to do it. There is no reason why they should have been able to be successful again and again and again, other than they were told, you can do it. It's a law of psychology. Why don't we do the same thing in computer architecture? We're not. We're coming up with excuses rather than saying, hey, there's opportunity to be done. I actually have a data slide. No, you got to have a data slide. Thanks. If you have too many data slides, then you're a new PhD. You're a new PhD looking for a job, see? If you have no data slides, then you're a department head. So you have to have a data slide. What this data slide does is look at the integer benchmarks. I picked the integer benchmarks because floating point, you know, anybody can, the parallelism is so embarrassingly huge that it's like shooting fish in a barrel. The integer code is much more tough. And for each benchmark, what I've got is four bars, instructions per cycle, so a bigger bar is better than a smaller bar, more instructions each cycle. And the one on the left, the black bar, is with a real cache, and real caches, I should say, and a real branch predictor, using our branch predictor, which is super good, but not perfect. And the yellow bar, the one on the right, is using perfect caches and a perfect branch predictor. And the two in the middle is, one is perfect and the other is real. And perfect branch predictor, real cache, real branch predictor, perfect cache. And you notice over all the benchmarks, look at the difference between the black bar and the yellow bar. There is a tremendous amount of headroom that is still there if we don't want to just give up and do web design. Right? So the opportunity exists. The naysayers be damned. So what is tomorrow's microprocessor going to look like? I've got this opportunity. I've got these challenges of 1 billion transistors on a chip, how to use them, and these high frequencies, so I can produce the stuff that these dreamers will be able to solve better and better problems with. And what's it going to look like in tomorrow's microprocessor? And so this is the list, and I can go on each one of these. There are a few that I want to spend a fair amount of time with, so let me treat those. First of all, this holistic approach. I sort of already hinted at that one when I showed you problems to electrons. So I'll show you the slide again, although now I'm saying the microprocessor is all this shaded part. So the problem comes in, and the electrons solve it, and why is it that I can't deal with all these things as a holistic unit? So I can put on the chip functionality that's only good for doing one thing. Maybe it computes an FFT. And I've got 1 billion transistors on a chip. 1 billion transistors, how many transistors does it take to do an FFT? It's in the noise. You know, AMD, we had this RISC hiccup back about 20 years ago that lasted for about 10 years, where instructions were supposed to be simple, take one cycle of execution. AMD had the simplest of those RISC chips. It was called the AMD 29000. And one of their instructions was called find first, which took a bit vector and found the first bit that was set in that bit vector. Try to do that in software. Takes a lot of cycles. Build a piece of hardware to do that. It's a simple priority encoder. Trivial. Very few transistors. How long does it take? Fraction of a cycle. Fraction of a cycle. But it's a special piece of hardware. With a billion, now they felt it was important enough, find the first bit that's set in a bit vector operating system kind of function. It was important enough to have a find first instruction. Today, with a billion, or tomorrow, with a billion transistors on the chip, one could have a lot of these specialized functional units. That is, if you think of, I've got problems to solve, and I can work through all of this, what functions do I want to perform? What's the algorithm look like? How should I make the microarchitecture, et cetera? And do a holistic approach, then maybe I can get a big performance win. One of the items, in fact, it's part of my power slide, but I feel like talking about it right now since I mentioned I've got a billion transistors out there. The business of power. So let me, power gives me a, so there are lots of things I can do to save power. One of these things I can do to save power is the refrigerator. Now, I understand I'm in Pittsburgh, and I understand that the name of the team is called the Steelers. Anybody know who the refrigerator was and who he played for? William Perry. Good. I know you know. William Perry. Perry played offense or defense? No. So half the game is offense. You know, unlike this European, the rest of the world plays this game, they call it football, but it's soccer. That's right. But they're not very good at unionizing because those guys play the whole game. In my country, the football players, they've worked a great union thing here. They only have to play half the game. Now, William Perry, if you look at half the game, the offensive team is on the field, and half the game, the defensive team was on the field. Which half the game was William Perry on the field? Defense. Defensive nose tackle is his position. Big guy. Nose tackle. When the offense was on the field, where was William Perry? On the bench. Right? Except when? No. Much more than just a Super Bowl when he scored the touchdown. If the Bears had the ball on the 2-yard line, not the 5-yard line, there's no way. But the 2-yard line, they'd bring William Perry into the game, hand him the ball, and point him in the direction of the goal line. That's why. 5-yard line, forget it. But 2-yard line, and he would score. Right? And when he'd score, he'd have half the defensive team on top of him, right? Dragging him into the end zone, the ref goes, touchdown. Right? 99% of the time, the offense is on the field, Perry's on the bench. Whoops, where'd he go? I put it away here. 99% of the time, the offense is on the field, Perry's on the bench. powered off. You draw no leakage current when there's no power to those transistors. So he's sitting there doing nothing. But when you need him, you really need him. And so, ball's on the 2-yard line, you power up William Perry. You bring him on the field for 10 seconds, he scores a touchdown, he goes back and sits on the bench. With 1 billion transistors on a chip, you can afford a lot of William Perrys. You know, when the wrist hiccup first hit the street, one of the reasons why it looked like a sexy idea is say, look at this, the whipping boy at that time was called the Vax Architecture, produced by Digital Equipment Corporation. And the RISC people said, look at this thing called the Vax. And look at the COBOL compiler. It never generates the index instruction. The index instruction on a Vax was used for figuring out where in a subscripted array a particular element of the array was. And it never used it. So, well, why do we bother having that index instruction? Then they looked at the Fortran compiler. And they said, the edit PC instruction is never generated by the Fortran compiler. Edit PC was a construct that mapped the COBOL picture construct onto the architecture. The point was not that Fortran never used edit PC and that COBOL never used index. Fortran used index. COBOL used edit PC. Why? Because when you need it, it's really good to be able to have it execute at the time that the transistors allow it to do, rather than do it in software. My example again, the bit vector, find first. With 1 billion transistors on a chip, you can afford to waste transistors, do functionality, where when it's not needed, it's powered off. If it's powered off, it's not consuming leakage power. It's just sitting there doing nothing. Now, it's the compiler's job, when it needs it, sufficiently in front, says, we need this. Power it up, hand it, FFT on a DSP chip. You're not doing FFTs every cycle on a DSP chip, but when you're doing them, you want to be doing them. So you have the functionality, you use it when you need it. So I wouldn't know that unless I treated the chip as an entire entity. And with 1 billion transistors, I can start to do that. The compiler, and I mentioned that the compiler would say when. The compiler microarchitecture symbiosis, we've started down that road. Predicated execution is an example. What I got to do? Stop at 5? Is that people starting to leave? Is that what? James, where are you? Where'd you disappear to? At 5? Okay, so I should. And I've been doing so much noise that nobody's asked questions, so I don't know. Anyway, compiler microarchitecture symbiosis, having the two of them work together. And there are several ways, multiple levels of cache. So to go off chip to memory takes what, 500 cycles? To get the data that I need right now should take like 1 cycle, 2 cycles max. It's a very big disconnect. So what do? Have multiple levels of cache. So I want the data, I'd like it in 1 cycle. Better be in that very small cache. Caches are either fast or big. They're not both. Laws of physics get you there. So if I want a fast cache, it's going to be a small cache. It's not going to keep that much data in it. So what do? I have multiple levels of cache. So I've got a single cycle or 2 cycle tiny, and then a bigger one, and then a bigger one yet. What I really need is something to manage that data, to move the stuff away when I'm through with it and in time for me to need it. My favorite cockamamie analogy there is you're sitting at your desk and you're working and you need to grab a file. And on your desk there are 3 file folders, so you grab one. It takes no time at all. If it's not there, if it's not one of those 3, what do? Reach in the file drawer. That takes time. But there are 100 folders in there. What you could do is take those 100 folders, put them on your desk. Now you can't just grab it. Okay? You can only grab it because there's only 3. And if it's not one of those, then you need to take it out of the drawer. And then you go to walk to the file cabinet for the 1,000 that are sitting there. That's the hierarchy, multiple levels. But you need something to manage this flow. What you'd really like is to have the folder that you need next sitting on top of your desk when you need it. There's only one way that I know to do this in the real world of having a folder on top of your desk when you need it. And that's hire your mother. Because only your mother can read your mind. And so you're working and she knows what you're going to need next because she can read your mind and she takes it out of there and puts it on the desk so that when you need it, it's sitting right there. The compiler is like your mother. So what the compiler can do, if we introduce into the ISA prefetch instructions, move from 2 into 1, move from 3 into 2, move from memory into 3, move from 1 into 2, move from into 3 into 4. So these prefetch and post-store instructions to move the stuff back and forth by the compiler and to do it in parallel with the processing that's working on the data. And so this on-chip, off-chip incredible disparity gets helped by the compiler. The block-structured ISA. Make the, what's the atomic unit of processing in a computer? It's an instruction. The x86. Figure out the address, go to memory, get the data, add it to a register, put the result back into memory. One instruction. One instruction. Ever see any of these Intel chips that they figure out the address, go get the data, add them, I changed my mind. You either do the whole instruction or you don't do the instruction. So the atomic unit of processing is a single instruction. You see a branch and you go this way, and now you have straight line code until the next branch. How often do you see the branch go this way, halfway to the next branch, you say, I changed my mind, I want to go down the other branch. No. So the sequence from this branch to that branch is an atomic unit of processing. Now we've decided that we want the ability to take exceptional events at the end of every instruction boundary. Like, for example, if going down this path you see a load and you take a page fault, you can't just keep going. So what we do is we say we'll put the machine into the state, the consistent state of just before that load, service the page fault, and come back. Why not say we'll treat the entire sequence as a single instruction? And if anything faults, and exceptions don't happen all the time. I mean, exceptions are infrequent relative to processing time. Exception happens, you back up to that, you undo that whole sequence, take the exception, then come down again. And then treat the whole unit as an atomic unit. A lot of good things happen with the block-structured ISA. For example, if you produce a result and consume that result in the same block, you don't have to tie up an architecturally visible register. You just produce the result. You know, we do that on a chip anyway. It's called data forwarding. Produce the result, forward it to where it's needed. We do that. But we also have to make sure that we keep the register file consistent. Look at a chip. Register file is ridiculously large, consuming a lot of power, lots of ports. We don't need it. We need it because we insist that the individual atomic unit is the instruction. I would say make it the block. Block-structured ISA. And let the compiler generate that atomic unit. And if we fault somewhere in that sequence, back up, service the exception, and then go down again. Part by the compiler, part by the microarchitecture. I have a problem with my students that for some reason compilers frighten them. Everything has to be done by the hardware, whether it makes any sense or not. And that's wrong. That's a mistake. What I really would like to do is have a symbiosis. So you look at a problem, you say, what can the compiler do? You know, a compiler can work, it isn't consuming its transistors. There's no time thing where I got to get it done quickly. I can make a pass with the compiler, make a second pass with the compiler. I can take the time to study the code on the sample data set, and hopefully it's representable, but I've got time to do things at compile time. I don't have time at runtime. At runtime, it better be quick. Now, I can't do everything with the compiler. Compiler doesn't know, caches are still non-deterministic. With my vision of the future, compilers will be caches will be deterministic because you'll move things in and out on the compiler controls. The compiler will know when something's in the cache. But right now, they're non-deterministic. Branches, which way the branch goes is data dependent. That's not known at compile time. And even function unit latency is not known at compile time because it's data dependent. What takes longer, a multiply or an add? Depends on what the operands are. When you multiply by 1, that's pretty quick. You add 1, that can be slow, ripple to carry. So there's a lot of things that the compiler can't know for real. Hardware knows for real because they're earlier in the instruction stream. So rather than ask the hardware to do the whole thing, partition the problem into part done by the compiler, part done by the microarchitecture, we augment the ISA to include, even one instruction will be enough, which is take this result that I've generated and stick it there so the hardware can use it to get the performance benefit. And the microarchitecture manages the optimization. A very simple thing, which actually the x86 ISA has it, the concept of a loop counter. A lot of ISAs don't have it. So we do branch prediction. So I go through the loop, and now I say, okay, do I branch back or do I fall through? Well, most of the time I branch back, not all the time. When I fall through, I get a misprediction. Except that when I enter that loop for I equals 1 to n, I know what n is. But at compile time, I don't know what n is. So why not have the compiler generate the instruction which at runtime says take n and give it to the branch predictor. So at compile time, the value n isn't known, but at runtime, before I enter the loop, I know what n is. The branch predictor has it, and it starts decrementing n. In fact, as I say, the x86 does that with the CX register. Most ISAs don't have that. And then the branch predictor can take advantage of that, and you get 100% branch prediction on loops. Right. It's an example of having the two work together. Fast track, slow track. This, I think, people are starting to come around on this one, which I've been advocating this one for a long time. You've got an ISA, and it has all this ugly stuff, often because of legacy code. And it's got streamlined stuff. So, for example, the x86 has ASCII adjust. Now, I don't know how much code, new code, uses ASCII adjust. Probably 0. But these instructions are in there. Or it may be that it wants to do a piece of work that you don't see often enough to make run at peak performance. In fact, engineering is all about a science of trade-offs. So if you get so many transistors, you want to spend those transistors on the bread and butter, on the things that you're going to see again and again and again. There's no point in wasting a lot of transistors to waste your transistor budget on something that, in order to make it run fast, when you're not going to see it very often, and it's fine if it runs slow, providing it doesn't run too slow. You know, my favorite example is, here's an instruction that shows up once a week. It shows up once a week. I don't have to make it run very fast. So I designed the logic so it takes 2 weeks to execute that instruction. And since it shows up every week, the program never executes to completion, right? Because every time it sees it, it takes 2 weeks, and it sees it every 1 week. Takes infinity to run the program. So you can't have it take that long. but you don't have to spend the budget to make it run super fast. So you take the ISA and you implement it so that there's a subset that runs like a bat out of hell, and the rest of it runs. The Microvax 2 chip essentially did that. So the Vax architecture had 304 opcodes. And the designer said, we can't fit all that on a single chip. But we got it. I got to have a single chip Vax. So what they did is they took 170 of them, and they ran on the chip. And the other 300 plus minus 170, if the opcode was decoded as one of those others, took an exception and did it in emulated software. Right? The idea is that you design to go fast that which you need to go fast. The rest goes slow. And most important, the compiler knows which is which. So as long as the compiler can generate the code from the fast thing, you're on the fast track. And if the compiler can't, then you may limp along. And you use the compiler you give the compiler the knowledge of what's going on in the chip, fast track, slow track, to then generate the code that accommodates that. That's what this says. Implement the ISA in 2 parts, fast track, slow track. The compiler knows what is done where and compiles accordingly. So let me spend a couple minutes on power. Professor Marculescu said, you got to spend a couple minutes on power. Right? Where is she? Yeah. Okay? Good. So I already mentioned the refrigerator. Virtual and physical. This comes out of UPC, the Polytechnic University of Catalunya in Barcelona. I understand Barcelona is now part of Spain as of the conquest by the people of Aragon 400 years ago. But if you've ever been to Barcelona, you know that they don't even speak Spanish in Barcelona. They speak Catalan. Anyway, I digress. This came out of UPC, which is a very strong computer architecture university. They noticed that you get this long pipeline, and you fetch, you decode the instruction, and now you rename. And when you rename, you allocate a register in the retirement structure, like the reorder buffer, for example. And now there it is, consuming leakage power. And then the instruction comes in, it sits in the reservation stations, and then sometime downstream it gets executed. And now that it's executed, you can write the result into this register that's been sitting there since it got renamed. And they said, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Why don't I, when I bring the instruction in, I will allocate the tag, the name, I will identify the register, but I won't assign it yet. In fact, I might have the need, conceptually, for let's say 1,000 registers in this register file, but at any one point in time, I've only got 50 results that have been produced. So I don't want to have 1,000 registers doing leakage current. 50 will do. 50 registers, because those 50 registers now have the result that has been produced at the end of this long pipeline. They're just going to sit there long enough for the retirement phase. So at rename time, I'll identify the tag. I'll differentiate this result from all the others, but I won't allocate the storage that's actually going to consume until I need that storage to write to. Sort of like just-in-time hardware design or something or other, or hardware utilization, just-in-time hardware utilization. I think it's a brilliant idea. That's one example, virtual. Retire does not necessarily mean imply update. We think of it, when we retire an instruction, we then update the architectural state. So if you do take an exception, you'll have a consistent state. The only time we really have to deal with the consistent state is if we take an exception. So why not defer the retirement until we actually need to? There's an awful lot of times we'll retire, and then we'll retire, and then retire, and we've never taken an exception, so we've done these unnecessary rights again and again. What am I trying to say? Can we look for places in the microarchitecture as we understand it where we're doing the things because that's the way we've always done it? So when I say power, I'm not talking about voltage scaling. There are people who will deal with that. I'm talking about saving power by not doing things the way we've always done them, by taking a fresh look. The register file. I have a student who says, why do we have registers? Why do we have a register file? Oh, we've always had a register file. You look at the chip, it consumes so much power. If we don't need the register file, but need enough buffers, sporadic throughout the chip, which we have anyway because of forwarding, etc. And it doesn't, by the way, I should also say that any one of these ideas says, look what I can save. Associated with it is a cost of then being able to do it that way. And that, look what I can save, better be greater than the logic it costs to utilize it. Otherwise, you're being stupid. But the first step is, let's look at this power hog and say, do I really need to do it that way? Can I do it another way? Can I, the business plan. Can I think out of the box, is the term they use. And not do it the old way. And by doing it this new way, all of a sudden the need for the power goes away. Not that the voltage scaling, and you know how voltage goes with frequency and all that, consuming power, but you're thinking differently now. And that's what all these slides are about. The refrigerator, I power off. What I don't need, I power off. Okay, I can go on and on. I'll stop here. If there are questions, we'll deal with that. If not, whatever. I'm done.
I think that this is a grand challenges that you mentioned. I do work on telecom IT chips, or getting this to 4 billion people who don't have bits. So your metric of performance is faster or better, 10 billion transistors, 10 gigahertz, etc. I wanted your views on alternative requirements that might be more towards cheaper, specialized things that need to be much cheaper, much less energy consumption, and your reactions to what I see are two problems to this.
So let me interrupt you and see whether I can guess one of the problems, first of all, and then I'll let you, if I guess wrong, because if I was going to spend another half hour, I'd get to some of those problems. I think probably the biggest problem out there right now for a computer architect who isn't even looking at it, and I really need to do that. In fact, when I was talking to Pradeep earlier today, and I mentioned it to him, he says, yeah, and we're doing it here at CMU, so I don't even have to, because you guys will solve it since you're so much smarter anyway. But it's how much would you give in performance or whatever else if you were guaranteed that you'd never get hacked? Right? So the security issue. And you say, well, there's no such thing as security, right? That is, if you care enough to hack the operating system, you can get through. Well, there's a thing called physical security. There's no network. You want to hack my machine, you got to come into my office. That's pretty good security, right? And in fact, if you've done work remotely where they care, they give you this little thingy that starts with a seed and then a random generator to keep giving you the new thing which you enter each time you want to log on. That's a step. I think we need the architects and the operating systems people working together to solve that problem. I would say that's an incredibly important problem. In fact, I would see that as one of the biggest problems that I haven't talked about. It's certainly not a performance problem, but it's a computer requirement that is probably more important than any of the stuff I've talked about today. And it's not a billion transistors, it's something different. But my focus, you're right, has been on how do I harness a billion transistors at 10 gigahertz. Was that one of your two or not? No. It wasn't. Good. Then what are you two?
Well, one is somewhat related. In your box where you said you have the problem on one end and the electrons at the other, how do we get loops or feedback to better understand what is the problem, what is the need, what do we need chips to do? It might not be FFTs, but it's going to be other stuff, especially if we think of embedded or distributed or low-cost sort of chips that are in the millions or billions or trillions at some point. And so the problem with that, I mean, I've done work to put hardware out in developing countries. It's not the hardware. It's not the cost or even the performance.
It's understanding what problems need to be
integrated with software. I mean, chips have Moore's law, optics have Gilmer's law. There's no good law for software.
Uh-huh.
And the second question,
Do these people, okay, go ahead, the second one?
where will this innovation come from if this is the right problem with the brand?
Oh, yeah. So the first thing, I'm sorry?
If you commoditize chips, you know, you're saying that, everything's an Intel's whatever, or everything, you know, Wi-Fi chips that used to be $800 or $5 today.
Yeah.
Then where's the innovation going to come from if everything's going to be...
Yeah, so okay, so I didn't get to that either. So the answer is that with a billion transistors, you're going to, so the history of computing has been asked backwards. We forced people into boxes to accommodate the machine rather than, I remember back, like when I was your age, this architect, building architect, said, look, we can design these houses with the computer. I said, yeah, then that means everybody can have his own or her own tailored house. Oh, no. We're going to use the computer to make the same house for everybody. Okay? That's what I mean by ask backwards. The computer allows us to design, you want a house that has 3 bedrooms? I don't need a bedroom. I don't sleep, you know. You want a 2-car garage? I walk. I don't need a garage. But I want to have a gym in my house because I like to work out. So every house will be tailored specially for you. And we tend to not do that enough. So with a billion transistors, why, and in fact the complexity design, which I had a bullet, which I never got to, is we will have units of functionality that you will then go in. It's like the way you buy a truck rather than the way you buy a car. When you buy a car, you go in and you buy the car. When you go out and buy a truck, you say, I want this and this and this, and they configure the truck to what you want. Right? That's the kind of thing. So with these pieces of functionality, we can configure. I would like to get back to the earlier thing. The way we're going to get that smarts in there so that we know this vertical thing, you start with my freshman course. So that everybody operating at this higher level understands what's going on at the lower level. The problem is there are too many people who don't have a clue. You know, in fact, I remember, I think it was during my Michigan days, where this guy wanted to write into a register and assume that what was in the register then get pushed down into the, you know, below thing, something or other. So each register was really a stack, because that was the mental picture he had of the register file. That if we understand better all the layers, and we start and we build so that you do understand all the layers, then maybe you have a shot at figuring out how you can do something that can then harness the stuff. I don't know whether I'm communicating with you or I'm way off on a different thing or not.
I mean, I still don't know who's going to do it from a funding point of view. I mean,
From a funding, right. Harold Stone once wrote a trip report saying that on his way back to Yorktown University, he stopped by CMU Inc. to visit some of his colleagues there. I don't care who's going to fund it, you know. I'm a college professor.
So Yale has a little bit of time on the schedule, so people should come down and meet Yale in person afterwards. I think Yale.
Thank you.